everybody. Welcome back to A People's Historian, the show where we read about 30 minutes of history together. My name is Jason Kishinev, and this episode we're going to start a new book entitled Defining Moments in Black History, Reading Between the Lies by Gregory, who was a civil rights activist that knew Dr. Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, and he was a big part of the 60s culture. Remember, if you enjoyed this episode, hit the like and subscribe button. I won't mind a bit. Let's dig in. Introduction. Dickology. Kind of enjoyed saying that. Says, nobody on the planet's got a better memory than a man who is illiterate. When he hits on a woman, since he can't write down her name, number, and address, he's got to memorize it. I wasn't always the smartest man in the room. On October 12th, they closed the schools. I thought they did it for my birthday since I was born on that day. It made me feel special. I didn't know anything about Columbus Day when I was coming up. I'm amused by that now, but what I've come to learn in my long life is that ignorance is not bliss. It is time-consuming and costly as hell. Case in point, as a boy I loved cowboy movies and went to see them 3 times a week, with the big show being on Sundays. I could relate to the cowboy because I saw my life in his. In every scene he wore the same pair of boots, the same jacket, the same outfit. His shoes were not shined. His socks were not clean. I never saw him read a book. Never saw him go to dinner. And I said, that's me. Cowboys were the biggest sensation on the planet at that time. And I thought I was one of them. But reality quickly set in. After the movie was over and I was leaving, I would walk through the alleys on my way home. I was embarrassed. Although the cowboys wore the same clothes and that made me feel comfortable in my poverty, I was not fully affirmed because I did not see any black cowboys in the movies. Once the movie was over, I was reminded that I was a poor black boy, and I felt shame. My boyhood shame shaped my life and my beliefs. It made me recognize that you don't buy a Rolls Royce and go back to the ghetto with it. You hang out where Rolls Royce people hang out. Why? Because you violate poor people with the very act of showing them what you have and reminding them of what is out of reach for them. The people in the ghetto are driving around in 20-year-old Fords. If you bring a Rolls Royce around, you obviously embarrass them. This is one of the reasons I'm disturbed by some black ministers, those that flash their excess around their poor congregants and claim it's a blessing from God. Why is God blessing only you? See, Catholic priests, no matter how much money they have, they all wear uniforms. No fancy clothes to make other folk feel bad about their own bargain basement clothing. You couldn't get more flamboyant than Daddy Grace, the founder and first bishop of the United House of Prayer for All People. He and his lover were wearing mink coats before they made them for men. I knew they were women's garb because the coats these guys had on buttoned on the left. And every Saturday, Daddy Grace would come out there and say, I'm in love with a man, I just can't call his name. And everybody thought he was talking about Jesus. If I had a church and a Rolls Royce, I would park 6 blocks away from the church and put on my robe. As I've matured, I've realized the poverty is nothing to be ashamed of. The way I see it, the poor make a sacrifice for the rich. But that's a whole other story. Although I felt bad after seeing the cowboy movies, while I was watching them, I was transported. I've never been on a horse in my life. Literally, I didn't have a horse. But I'd slap my leg and say, giddy up, giddy up. And when my mama made me mad, I'd say pow and point my finger like it was a gun. After that, what were the odds of me growing up and liking non-violent Martin Luther King Jr.? As a boy, John Wayne was my hero. John Wayne didn't talk about non-violence. If you're right and they're wrong, then kill them. That's what John Wayne said, and I loved that. Then I had to rethink that whole thing when I got to know King. Now I look at John Wayne and say, you nasty, violent, ignorant somebody. That's why I say ignorance is not bliss, but costly. I did not understand the limits of violence. It took Martin Luther King to show me, and I didn't know that I should be ashamed of being poor either. But change in attitude does not come quickly. When I was in high school, I worked at the Shell gas station, making more money than I had ever had. One summer day, the weather was good. A few of the other guys and I were talking trash and looking at some girls who were standing on the corner. I said, man, let's forget about work. And we skipped work for several days to hang with the girls. We didn't worry about it until it got close to payday. At the same time, we were kind of thinking that we might be fired since we hadn't shown up for work for days. We were scared to return. Sure enough, when we got back to work, the boss said to me, where you been? I lied and said my mama died. Next thing I know, he came on over, started touching my shoulders, saying, oh, I'm sorry to hear about that. I'm just so sorry. Then he opened up his old worn-out leather wallet, took out a $10 bill, handed it to me, and said, just enjoy yourself. I said, I came to get my check. He said, hold on, I'll get it for you. About 6 months later, the same thing happened. This guy named Charles Simmons and I were just sitting outside talking trash to the girls, not thinking about going to work. Eventually, we went to get our checks and my white employer asked, where you been? I said, my mama died. And he did the same thing as the previous time, patted me on the back and gave me money. At that moment, I knew that he was not really thinking about me. Learning that my boss did not sincerely care was an important lesson for me to learn early in life. I have not worked for anyone since. I've been on my own, making up my career as I go along. People call me an activist, social critic, comedian, and let's not forget, conspiracy theorist. In this book, I have combined all of these talents to allow us to look at American history differently. Part of my unique perspective was having been there. I was friends with most of the people mentioned, and I stood next to some of them during their greatest moments. Muhammad Ali, Michael Jackson, Rosa Parks, Angela Davis, Dr. King, Malcolm X, and so many more. Along with my activism, I have spent my entire life in the pursuit of knowledge. Knowledge as it has meaning to me as a person of color. I appreciate all people, no matter their race, especially since we all evolved from the same stardust. But we must all be honest and recognize that the way black people see the world is quite different from how others see it, which is as it should be. One's race is more clearly defined by cultural practices and values than skin color. For instance, have you ever read those stories about people who were found dead at their jobs? One of those stories where they found a person keeled over, head on his desk, and he was not discovered until the next day? I guarantee that would never be a black person. If black people felt a little bit funny, like something ain't right in the air kind of funny, we're calling in sick. If it's looking like rain, and you know what that does do to our hair, what that does to our hairdo, we're thinking of calling in. If we ate too much at dinner and our clothes are too tight the next morning, we're not going to work. Many Caucasian people, on the other hand, love their work. At their jobs, they are affirmed and well compensated. They're given all the resources they need to make every day a good day. So it's no surprise that they love their work so much that they don't even want to retire. If I didn't work for myself, I would have retired a long time ago. I would still retire, even though I know that about 100 years before I was born, black folks were qualified to do what I'm doing now, but they didn't get the chance. But seriously, other races have a different relationship to work because historically they haven't been demeaned by it, and they most definitely have not been compensated for their labor. The earlier I got to work every day, the earlier I'd lose my dignity. And if I could find a reason to get off earlier, the sooner I'd get it back. In my pursuit of knowledge throughout my more than 80 years on this planet, I've learned many interesting things, particularly about culture. Way back, lightning struck a pig barn. Know how rich you need to be to keep pigs in a barn? Well, two brothers, the sons of the barn's owner, ran out to the barn and saw that it was burning down. They smelled something they liked. Barbecue. They started sniffing and said, "Damn, that stuff smells good." But check this out. Hundreds of years passed before the brothers and their children and their children's children realized that they could cook a pig without burning the barn down. This is all in italics. Without burning the barn down. That's how long it takes to undo a culture. A way that people do things that's been there forever because that's how they've always done it. In fact, they think they'd be crazy to do it a different way. If your children were born in France and then you and your wife weren't around, what language would they speak? French, right? Language doesn't have a thing to do with human nature, with who you are as a person. It's culture. Wars are about culture. That's why you and I, if we live in the same country, can't have a war. The Civil War was about culture. The North didn't want the South to have slaves. If you go to Japan today, can you read a Japanese sign? No, you can't. You think the universal God wanted something to change when you crossed the border? You think God wanted the border to begin with? That's how the whole thing is messed up. In relation to culture, I always say, white is not a color, it's an attitude. Black folks, we don't appreciate ourselves. Look here, anytime an oppressor says, if you have 1/32 Negro blood, you're an N-word, I say, wait a minute. Think about that now. This is my enemy. This is a guy who hates me and will do anything to keep me down. So what he is saying is that in order to equal one of me, you've got to put 32 white boys next to me. But black folks don't hear it that way. We hear the negative part of that statement. I mean, if you have a dollar bill, in order to equal that dollar in pennies, you'd have to have 100 of those little things. It's the same with white folks and black folks. We're powerful, creative, and often ingenious. Unfortunately, there are only a handful of us who believe in our greatness. I'm not saying that other people are not exceptional. I'm saying that we are too. Again, we are all from the same stardust. If black people believed in ourselves and not what people say about us, we would be leading the discussion on race relations rather than reacting to it. In fact, we could make the world realize how ridiculous racism is. For example, when I participated in civil rights marches, many times whites would attack us with dogs and fire hoses. At some point later, I had to laugh about the situation. Think about it. These folks were so angry that they were acting stone cold crazy, frothing at the mouth, chasing blacks with dogs, spitting on us. And angry about what? Racism makes no sense. Whites hate blacks just because of the color of our skin. Any rational person knows that we can't control the color of our skin, but it's not our skin, it's who we are that makes them lose their minds, or maybe it's seeing in our faces the atrocities they committed in our shared past. That's powerful. So now you look at this mess we're in, this racist mess that came about because we're not thinking. Slavery has messed up our minds in countless ways. For instance, a black woman is the only woman on the planet who goes to a place called a beauty parlor. All other women go to a hair salon, but our women have been convinced that they are not attractive. They're in the beauty parlor spending good money for what God already gave them: hair, nails, lashes. I'm here to say God made everybody, and did God make ugly people? Sears and Roebuck didn't give me a nappy hair. The same universe that put the sun, moon, and the stars in place gave me nappy hair. But then the white boy comes in and starts praising his definition of beauty in the media, and we believe it. If I was here a billion years before you, then don't tell me that stuff you're using ain't mine. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments freed black people, made us citizens, and gave black men the right to vote, although they prevented us from doing so. The white woman didn't get the legal right to vote until 1920. Now that white woman was the white boy's mama, but he would not let her vote. That was his mama. That was his daughter. That was his wife. That was his girlfriend. Anyway, we keep looking up to the white man, saying to ourselves, oh, I'd like to be like him. For so many of us, our minds are so messed up that we want to be like him, even though it does not make cultural sense. Meanwhile, he's trying to be like us, except he don't know it because he's trying to keep from seeing what he's doing. He's trying to keep from seeing that's what he's doing. People say, well, I don't know why these white folks are lying in the sun trying to get a suntan. Man, hear what he's saying, a suntan, not a sun black. I was doing some research and found an article that said that 80% of the coral reefs had been destroyed by suntan lotion. They'd been there trillions of years, and if suntan lotion does that to a coral reef, what do you think it's doing to people? The universe will pay your ass back. A white man may not say he's trying to be like us, but look at what he's doing. A rose a rose by any other name. See what I'm saying? We don't appreciate ourselves. We don't appreciate what it means to go through what black people have been through and still be here. Think about being under stress all the time and what that does to your body. The adrenaline rush and all the other physiological stuff. Did you ever walk down the street and see a car turn the corner and come up on a dog? Ever see what happens to the cat's body? It goes straight up. That's the response that God gave it. Fight or flight. Hair sticks up, shoots out every which way like the Big Bang if the universe were made of fur. It's the same with humans and adrenaline. Your eyes. Suddenly you can see 40 miles away. The fastest animal out there, you can outrun it. You have the energy of you and somebody else too. Now that's meant to happen for just a few minutes until you're out of danger. That fight or flight response wasn't meant to exist 24 hours a day every day. But when something that's supposed to last a few minutes happens to you all the time, how do you think that will mess you up? Why do you think black folks have high blood pressure so bad? That and pork rinds. It's a genetic response to the oppression we've been dealing with for 400 years, passed down from one generation to the next. If I were to leave home and go to work knowing a racist was there, I would start getting scared. But I can't quit my job. Now that's not a problem for just black folks. Most other folks can't quit their jobs either. They've got mortgages to pay. They've got children to send to college. Financial worries are the same with black folks, except we also have to be worried about racism too. I have to go to work. I have to take care of this, take care of that, just like white folks. But with all that pressure I feel, that fight or flight response, that suppressed fear and rage, it changes my whole body chemistry. When I leave work and yell at my wife or children, it's not because I'm mad at them. I'm mad at the boss man. But it would cost me my job to say something to him. If I haul off and slap him upside the head, the rest of the Negroes say, N-word must be crazy. He knew he was going to be fired. That's why when black folks go to church, our music has got to be loud. Go to a white Catholic church, they're not hollering. Our music's got to be loud just so we can forget the boss man and the week we just had, so we can have a little bit of peace. We've got to unmess up our minds from what we've been through. We use the music to clear our heads, and we move our bodies and dance to shake off the excess stress. So if the white boy thinks it takes 32 of him to equal 1 of me, that's why. As I said, we don't appreciate ourselves. We believe what other folks say about us. The purpose of this book is to spread the knowledge, to get the world thinking again, and to see what is truly there and not just take what we are told as truth. When I was a little boy, maybe my mama didn't read that well, but we had every encyclopedia you could find. I would blow the dust off of them and read a volume every now and then. Valuing information is something I have passed on to my children. Most of us do that, but keep in mind your children don't hear what you mean, they hear what you say. So when you teach your black children, you've got to work twice as hard as a white child. They hear you saying they're dumb. One day, my then 8-year-old son, Christian, said to his mother, I want to tell you something, but don't tell Dad. I was out for recess and I forgot I left something behind and went back into the school to get it. I overheard a white teacher say, Christian's so dumb sometimes I think he is not a Gregory. When I came home that night, Lillian, my wife, told me about the situation. I went in to see Christian. Dad, am I as dumb as they say? He asked me, and I said, you are a dumb little boy. That's what you are. Your mama won't tell you that, okay? But I'll tell you because you are, and I'll tell you because the difference between A's and D's has got nothing to do with smartness. It's discipline, that's all. And your sister Michelle, my advice is to follow her around everywhere she goes and do what she does. One day when Christian was 13 years old, I was running through the house getting ready to go out, and he stopped me and said, how did you know if I started following Michelle I'd start making straight A's? And I said, the difference between an A and an F is discipline, and your sister is the most disciplined person I know. Today, Christian is a doctor. It's true I did not have any issues with my daughters when it came to education. Women are smarter than men because most boys spend time playing. Girls make better grades because they are in the house studying. For the most part, that's the way black girls are raised, to stay in the house. One day, my daughter Michelle came to me and said, well now, since you made me go to this white school, I'm fixing to go to grad school. Where should I go? Since she was acting so high and mighty, I said, go to the London School of Economics. She did. She did not even know it existed when I mentioned it, but a few months later she came to me with an acceptance letter. Today she has the only PhD in sexual harassment in the workplace on the whole planet. If she comes in and testifies against you as an expert witness, that's it, you're going down because she's the authority on the subject. We can get into serious trouble by not valuing education and learning. Did you know that 98% of the children who drown in the summertime are black? Why? Because historically, we weren't allowed in swimming pools because of Jim Crow. That law put a bad taste in black folks' mouths, and to this day I don't know how to swim. On my family's farm there was a lake of 1,000 feet deep. I told her, if one of our kids starts to drown, you go get him. I'm not going in the water. I can't swim. I'm not going to play like I'm swimming. And when I was home and the kids were out in the water playing, I would leave the house. I didn't even want to hear them call my name when they were near the water. Everybody knows we were at one time enslaved, but many of us think that we're supposed to be slaves and act like we believe it too. Look here, when Africans were brought to the Americas, we didn't become slaves until we got here. If you jumped off the ship, you weren't a slave. You were a person who had been kidnapped. You didn't pick cotton on the way over here. It's not in your nature to be a slave. You see, these people we're dealing with didn't raid a country. They raided a whole continent. I'm from a whole continent. A continent made up of tribes at war with one another. The Oyos didn't like the Dahomies, who didn't like the so-and-sos, who didn't like the so-and-sos. We black folks had spears, and for 1,000 years we were throwing them at one another. In that way, we were like the people in Europe who were also fighting one another, although they used different weapons. Europe is a continent. Almost every single one of those countries on that continent has fought every last one of the others. They didn't have to fight Asia. They were too busy fighting each other all over the continent. Now, in slavery times, black folks were put on ships in West Africa. That very same spot where the slaves were put on ships is where hurricanes start. Most hurricanes start in West Africa and follow the same trail that the slave ships followed. There is no record of a hurricane hitting America before that. If you don't believe me, look it up. The first Americans were brought to America as slaves in 1619. The first hurricane slammed into this place in 1635. I say a hurricane is the spirit of a black woman. That's why it starts with her. No slave was offloaded until the ships got to the Caribbean. Hurricanes stay below water until they get all the way to the Caribbean. They will hit the United States and come up the East Coast all the way to Maine. Now, Canada is as close to Maine as a car is to the curb, but Canada doesn't have hurricanes half as bad as we have. Why not? Because Canada never messed with a black woman like we did, although they did have slaves. That black sister, she's the only person on this planet who can take a butter knife and cut your tires to the rim. And everybody says, wait a minute, a butter knife? Better believe it, man. That is who she is. That's who we are. That's the spirit. That's power. Other folks see it, but we don't. There's another indication of our power in the universe. Prior to the Middle Passage, sharks had a natural migration. They swam in this particular pattern for hundreds of years. Then the Middle Passage comes along, all that blood in the ocean, the blood of millions of black people. The sharks changed their migratory pattern to follow the blood. They continue to swim along that same route today. Slavery was wrong on so many levels that it changed the world in ways that we do not even recognize. That's our power. Thanks for joining me. Tune into the next episode. I think this is going to be a thoroughly enjoyable book. I can't even think of the word. I'm just enjoying the book. Yeah. Hit that like and subscribe button, and we'll see you next time. Thanks. Enjoyable. That's the word.